နှစ်စုနှစ်ပြည်စုံကြပြီးဝေနာပြည်ချမ်းသာမဲ့ဖို့နိဗ္ဗာန်ချမ်းသာကိုလင်းမြန်စွာရနိုင်ကြပါစေယမဟမုဒ္ဒမိတမရေချနမောตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะBuddham Taranam Gissami, Dhammam Taranam Gissami, Sangham Taranam Gissami. Saranagahanam Paripunam. Di Saraninath Pinsa Thilan Tarukan Kadwa Apamadina Sampadesa. Uzin Bamazaga, Thick Kong Kong Mapioda Lo, a Yin Lobe, Uzin Amya Apin Inglet Lo, Tea Homena. So I've been asked to read this. The topic of tonight's talk will be the 4 kinds of Theravada in the West, and I'll be comparing how Ashit Nangan Theravada and Analt Nangan Theravada, how they compare with each other. And today is July 2nd, 2016, on a Saturday, at the Theravada Dhamma Society in Daly City, San Francisco Bay Area in California. Also, I've been requested before I start giving the regular talk that because of technical difficulties last time, that I repeat some of what I said the first time last week, especially the first part, because it didn't record or something. So last week I was talking about how I became a monk, and I suppose the first reason is just parami from past lives, but I can't really talk about that because I don't remember them. And so in this life, the first big reason why I became a monk, or how I was able to become a bhikkhu, is because I had a strange father. And he encouraged me to be not to follow along with everybody else. I should think for myself and make my own decisions and decide what is right and wrong for myself. And he considered himself to be Buddhist, but his kind of Buddhism was a strange kind of Buddhism because he was a hypnotist. And so he would hypnotize women sometimes. He would hypnotize people, and then they would become like a gnat wind, and then spirits or nats would talk through them. And so he met his own co-sant nat, his guardian spirit this way. His guardian spirit was a dead Vietnamese Mahayana Buddhist monk. And so he learned about Buddhism from this gnat talking through a hypnotized woman. And so his understanding of Buddhism is very different from our understanding. You know, he wasn't ordinary Theravada. It was kind of a strange sort of Buddhism that he learned. But he definitely believed in karma and past lives in Patithandi. And through hypnosis, he considered himself to be able to remember some of his past lives. And also he was very sure that I was his father reborn. So if that's true, then I'm my own grandfather somehow. But I don't remember, so I can't say for sure. But my grandfather was similar to me. He was a Baptist minister, but he was kicked out of being a Baptist minister for having wrong view. So then he became the teacher of a boys' school, or the headmaster of a Christian boys' school. So partly because of my father, I didn't follow along with what everybody else was believing. And at about the age of 16, I just went into rebellion against the system because I just did not feel satisfied. America is a very materialistic country. You know, it's all materialism is the truth, and religion is maybe like an extra hobby that you do in your spare time, but most people believe materialism first and then they add other things to that. And it just couldn't satisfy me because it was too shallow. I didn't want to dedicate my life to making money and getting a house and, you know, just doing the ordinary things that everybody was doing and thought that was all you're supposed to do. There was like this deep place that, I mean, it didn't touch that. It was still empty. It wasn't satisfied. So I got into lots of trouble because I was a 16-year-old rebel and wasn't following along. And I went from being an honor student to almost failing high school just in a matter of just a few months. I just started just failing in school and getting into lots of trouble. So then my father required me to see a youth counselor. I don't know how to say youth counselor in Burmese. I don't know if they have youth counselors. I assume they do. But it turned out that he was a very spiritual person, very wise man. And he started giving me spiritual books to read. And I didn't really understand them at first, like reading about Buddhism and Hinduism and meditation and this kind of thing. I didn't really understand it because it was so different from anything that I had ever seen before. So I couldn't really integrate it. It didn't fit in with all the other things in my mind. But still, I had this intuition that it was true. It just felt right, like deep down. It felt like I can respect this. I can really dedicate myself to this. And so, starting at about the age of 17, I had this ambition, this yi yue chet, of becoming a monk. I wasn't sure what kind yet. Maybe Zen. I liked Zen at the time because Zen Buddhism is very simple and it's based on meditation. And they say that you can't really know the truth by talking about it or thinking about it, that you just have to realize it through meditation, which is something that I liked. But when I was in college, I just started going through the spiritual section of the library and just reading about all these different religions, any religion I could find. You know, so I read about Christianity and Islam and different kinds of Buddhism and even like the Nigantas, the Jains. I was reading some of their scriptures. Some of them are very interesting, but I could accept Buddhism the best, partly because it had less of a story. Like in Christianity, there's this story. You know, Jesus was the Son of God and he died for our sins. And if the story is true, then Christianity might be true, but if the story isn't true, then Christianity is, maybe half true at best. And there's no way to prove the story. You can't prove it. You have to wait until you're dead to find out whether you're right or not. And I didn't want to wait until I was dead in order to find out whether I was right or not. That's like gambling with your whole life. But with Buddhism, you can, at least to some degree, to the extent that you make progress, you can see whether it's true or not. Like the Four Noble Truths, the first noble truth is pretty obvious. Nobody is completely happy. Everybody's at least a little bit unhappy. Even the happiest people, and still they're not always happy. And with regard to the second noble truth, if you think about it, it's pretty obvious that that suffering is caused by desire. Whenever you're unhappy, it's because you want something, and that's a very important thing to know. Like if you're unhappy, or with me, it's like a habit now. If I get unhappy, I'll just say, okay, what is it that I want? And there's always something. Sometimes if you're just depressed, it's just this vague kind of wanting things to be different without really knowing exactly what it is that you want. And maybe you don't really want anything exactly other than just for things to be different than they are now. But still, you always want something. And sometimes it's very helpful just to know what you want, because sometimes you can see that you want something really stupid. It's like sometimes in Burma, I want to heat my bath water. In Mimyo, it's cold sometimes, so you have to heat up the water so that you don't freeze while you're trying to take a bath. And right when I want to heat the water, the electricity goes off. Because in Burma, the electricity goes on and off at random. So it's like, then I just start getting frustrated, and it's like, oh, they can't do anything right. It's like this dumb government, they can't even get the electricity to work, But then it's like, I think, what do I want? And it's, of course, I want the electricity to be on, which is just stupid, because wanting it to be on isn't going to turn the electricity on. It's just unnecessary unhappiness. So that's useful, and especially in a place like America, where most people have everything that they really need. Almost all of our unhappiness is this unnecessary, silly desire for things to be different. You want it not to be raining when it's raining, but all the wanting in the world isn't going to make it stop raining. So it's just completely unnecessary unhappiness. And so just being able to look inside yourself and see that you want something and you wanting it isn't going to help at all. That it may not make the suffering go away, because it's the suffering or the desire is coming up through karma. It's like automatic, but at least you're not feeding it. You're not making it stronger. You're not, you're, by just being mindful of it and detaching from it, then it's sort of like a stray dog. Like you got this kwe win za, if it comes and you feed it, it's not going to go away. But if you stop feeding it, it may stick around for a long time before it goes away, but finally it's going to give up and go away. And like bad habits, getting angry when you're driving at the person that drove in front of you or something. You can be mindful of it and just sort of detach, and still the frustration can arise for a long time, because it's karma. It's you're not deciding to be unhappy. It's just happening automatically, because we're not all the way awake yet. And so we're sort of on autopilot. To a large degree, we're just acting according to habit. But at least if you're being mindful, then these habits become weaker. You're not feeding them anymore. And so gradually they can fade away. So with Buddhism, you can just look at the basics, and you can see for yourself to a large degree whether they're true or not. You might not be able to see that they lead all the way to Nibbana, but you can at least extrapolate. You can see that the less craving you have, the less tatna you have, the less dukkha you have. So then you can just use logic to say that when the dukkha reaches zero, that's when the tatna reaches zero. So at least you can use intelligence and your own experience to see whether Dhamma is true or not, at least the basics of it. And you might not be able to know for sure whether the Buddha really did spend the Wa at this monastery 2,500 years ago and whether he really said this or that, but at least with regard to the basics. So that's one thing that I really liked about Dhamma, and is that someone who thinks all the time and wants proof, at least they can find the proof if they look for it, at least with regard to the most important parts. And so getting back to the story of how I became a monk, ever since I was about 17, I had the desire to become some kind of monk, probably a Buddhist one. But I still liked girls, and I still liked ice cream and pizza and rock and roll. And so it took about 10 years. I was 27 when I finally became a monk. I was for sure I was going to become a monk before I was 30. And so I was ahead of schedule on that anyway. And as most of you may know, I was ordained at Boulder Creek, Tongpulu, and Laindet Seattle was my preceptor. And at first I had no idea. I just saw the address in a book. It was a list of Buddhist organizations in America. And it just said Tongpulu Siap Dao, and it had an address. And even Seattle wasn't spelled right. It had a P in there that didn't belong. And I had absolutely no idea what a Tongpulu Siap Dao was, but it looked like it could possibly be a monastery, a Ponjijang. So I wrote down the address and sent a letter saying I wanted to become a monk. And then I got a letter back, and so I went and checked it out. And also I went to check out a Zen monastery near Mount Shasta. And it was pretty obvious that at Tongpulu, it was closer to what the Buddha really taught. It was like an ancient way of life. The monks were living very simply and following ancient rules. And so I wanted to be as close to what the Buddha taught as I could. And that's sort of getting into what I'm going to talk about tonight, where Westerners in general, I think, they want to get as close to what the Buddha originally taught, and they're trying to be as scientific about it as they can. And so sometimes we do strange things that are not in accordance with the tradition. But I'll try to get back to that if I remember. So that's sort of a synopsis of how I became a monk. And when I was in Burma, many years ago, it's like 12 years ago, I think, a German monk who lived at Pa'ao sent me an article. And I don't remember the name of the article, but it was about different kinds of Buddhism in America, or in the West. And according to this article, there are 3 kinds of Buddhism in the West. They called it ethnic Buddhism, evangelical Buddhism, and elite Buddhism. And ethnic Buddhism, that's like Lumyo Adain, or I don't know how you would say ethnic in Burmese. But what it's talking about is like the Asian people who come from Buddhist countries and live in America. So all of you are ethnic Buddhists according to this article, except me. I'm not an ethnic Buddhist. Or maybe I am according to that article. And according to the article, the ethnic Buddhists, it's not just Burmese, of course. It's anybody that comes from a Buddhist culture mainly in Asia. Like Chinese people and Japanese people and Thais and Burmese and Sri Lankan and anybody from a Buddhist culture who comes to America and is practicing Buddhism here. That would be called ethnic Buddhism according to this article. With regard to evangelical Buddhism, I have no idea how to say evangelical in Burmese. I don't know if there's even a word, but it's, I think they just wanted a word that started with E, because all the other ones start with E. But it's a weird kind of Japanese Buddhism called Soka Gakkai. That's what the article was talking about. They try to get converts. So that's why it's called evangelical. They try to convert people to get as many as they can to join. But I know almost nothing about it, so I won't say anything more about that. And then the other kind is called elite Buddhism. And that's like what a Bodan or what a Minson Luji Myo. I don't know how to say elite. In Burma, they've got the Elite bus company, but I don't know. It's spelled the same. But with regard to elite, it's called elite because it's the Westerners who are practicing various kinds of Buddhism, like Vipassana and also Zen and some kinds of Tibetan Buddhism. And it's mostly older white people with university degrees who make lots of money who practice this kind. And so I was reading this article, and ever since then I would think, well, how does that apply to Theravada especially? And so I think about this stuff a lot because I would like to see Dhamma grow in America. And people tell me, sometimes people come to me and say, America needs people like you. America needs more Dhamma. And it really does, in my opinion, because especially nowadays, because Westerners, people in the West in particular, don't know how to be happy. They think that if they fix everything on the outside, they'll be happy. But really, they don't realize that whether you're happy or unhappy comes from inside. It's like the second noble truth. If you have craving, then you have suffering. And sometimes I tell Americans and sometimes I tell Burmese villagers something, and almost nobody believes me, but I'll tell you anyway. And that is that I've lived in Myanmar for 20 years. And I've lived in America for more than 20 years. And when I lived in Myanmar, it was mostly out in the farmers, the villages, not much in town. And it's very obvious to me that the average Burmese villager has less dokha than the average American. I mean, you go to a village in Burma and it's just happy faces, smiling faces. And then you go to America and everybody's just walking on the sidewalk, not looking at anybody else in there, or else they're looking at their cell phone or something. And you don't see very many smiles, or if you do see a smile, it's just a fake plastic one that they show you for half a second and then it disappears again. And even the Burmese villagers, they don't want to believe this. They want to think America is like Naki, where everybody's beautiful and rich and happy, because that's the way it is in the movies. Really, it's pretty obvious to anyone who spends a lot of time in a Burmese village and then comes to America and looks at people walking down the street. You just count smiles, and you'll find a lot more smiles in the village. And the answer is just very simple. It's just the second noble truth. That Americans have more desires than Burmese villagers have. The Burmese, they still have dokha. Everybody has dokha, but in Burma, it's like, the baby gets sick, and you don't have the right kind of medicine. You have malaria, and then the seisiya gives you these pills that don't work. So you've had malaria for 6 months, this kind of thing, or there's a flood, or the house catches fire, or the government moves the village to some other place because they want to build a factory here or something. So that kind of suffering, but just the average everyday suffering, Americans have a lot more. Just because we're taught that you should have desires. Desire is good. You've got all these commercials telling you desire this, you can't be happy unless you have this kind of car, or you have the best iPhone or whatever. And so everybody believes this because Westerners in general, I don't know why this is, whether it's genetic or whether it's cultural, but Westerners, they look outside when they want to find happiness, or they want to understand the truth. They want to know the highest truth. They look outside. And that's why in the West, they're always inventing new things and trying to fix things. And because they're trying to somehow be happy by fixing things, making things better on the outside, but still they're not happy on the inside. And so I think the West could really use more Dhamma just to teach people to look inside and to see that your dukkha is coming from inside. Your dukkha comes from in here and not from outside. And in the West, it's almost exactly the opposite of Dhamma. If you're unhappy, it's somebody else's fault. Somebody's wearing a shirt that you don't like, it's their fault for wearing the shirt, and it's not your fault because you have this dotha coming up because of it. So, because of that, I was thinking about this article about the 3 kinds of Buddhism. And it seems to me that in America, just with regard to Theravada, I don't know anything about Soka Gakkai or don't know very much about Zen anymore, but Theravada I know something about. And so it seems to me that there are 4 kinds. First, you've got ethnic Theravada. And that's Asian people from Theravada countries who come to America and they stay Buddhists. They practice Buddhist, and to some degree their children. Although mainly it's the people who have come from the Buddhist countries. And so that's the first kind. The second kind is Western monastic Theravada. So I'm one of those, the Western monks. And to some degree, there are also some Western people who support the monks, but not very many. Westerners don't support monks very much. They just don't see the point of it. And there are a number of reasons for that, in which I'll get to. But first I just want to list the 4 kinds. And then, so the third kind is the elite Theravada. So that's what the first article was talking about, except with regard to just the Theravada people, which is like the Vipassana people. Like the most famous place in California would be Spirit Rock. Spirit Rock is like the capital, like the Mecca of elite Theravada in Western United States. And then the 4th kind is the Goenka method, the Goenka system, which is just its own group. It doesn't really fit into any of the other ones. And it's just kind of a sad fact that even though Burmese Theravada works very well for the Burmese people, because Americans think differently, you can't just take Burmese Theravada and have American people follow it. It's like you go to a Burmese temple, you don't see very many Westerners there. It's almost all Burmese people. And there are reasons for that. One is, like I mentioned last week, that the Burmese people who are Buddhists, or Asian people who are Buddhists, are the conservatives. They're amyanet lightniti. They're following along with what everybody else is doing. Whereas the Westerners who practice Buddhism, for the most part, they're the radicals. They're the ones that aren't following what everybody else is doing. So just that kind of thinking is different. They're the ones that they're criticizing, and I don't like, they're looking at things with skepticism, and so because of that, that's one difference. And another difference is with regard to in Dhamma, they talk about the 5 indriyas, or the 5 balas, and 2 of them are piññā and tada, and they should be in balance. If you have too much tada, too much faith, you can believe anything. People will tell you anything and you can believe it. So you can follow the wrong path easily. And with regard to piññā, it doesn't really mean wisdom in this case. It means something more like cleverness. Like a lule would be someone who with a lot of this kind of piññā. So it's like you're too clever. And if you have too much of this piññā, it's not in balance with faith, then nobody can tell you anything. Even the truth you can reject because you can think of ways, you can think of ways of having doubts about it. It's like, well, how do you know that? Where's your proof? And some things it's very difficult to prove. You have to prove it inside yourself. So the Asians are more sada. If they're not in balance, usually it's too much sada and not enough piññā. They don't have enough, not objective. I don't know exactly how to say it. But with regard to the Western people, it's like they don't have enough Sada. You know, they want proof for everything, and some things is very difficult to prove. So that's another difference between Eastern Buddhists and Western Buddhists. Is Western Buddhists think too much, maybe, and Eastern Buddhists, in some ways, they don't think quite enough. And of course, another difference between East and West is, like I already mentioned, Westerners start off with materialism. That's like the foundation. That's the basic. You start off with materialism. Science tells the truth. Or just lately, over the past few decades, there's a new kind of ideology, progressivism or something like that, that actually doesn't quite follow science, but materialism, some kind of materialism, where you're looking for the truth outside instead of inside. And with regard to a lot of Asian Buddhists, you start with Dhamma. Dhamma comes first, and then you might add science to that, or you can add other things to that, but the fundamental Amyin, the point of view, the deity, is it starts with traditional Buddhist culture, and then you can make changes to that. So because people in the West, like in America, they're not just automatically starting off from the time that they're little with Buddhism, unless they come from a very Buddhist family that's raising them that way. And then when they get into school, then they'll start being challenged, because nobody else has the same point of view. And when you're a kid, you want to follow along with what your friends are doing. So it's more difficult in the West in that respect. And when I talk about Asian Theravada, even the different countries are different. It's not like there's just one kind of Asian Theravada. Like Myanmar and Thailand are right next to each other, and they're both Theravada Buddhist, but even Burmese Theravada and Thai Theravada are not exactly the same. For example, in Myanmar you have more Kamatan and Parayati, whereas in Thailand you've got more Wini and more Dutin. So you've got a lot of monks that are called Pra Tudong in Thailand, and that's like a Shin Dutin. They don't live in a monastery except during the Wa. The rest of the time they're just walking around, and they sleep under trees and sleep in cemeteries and this kind of thing. So there's more of that in Thailand. So it's not just one kind of Buddhism in Myanmar, and not just, or in Asia, and just one kind of Buddhism in the West. So getting back to the ethnic Theravada in the West, I think you've all noticed that there aren't very many Westerners who come to the monastery, not very many times anyway. They'll come a few times and then they lose interest and then they go away. And to some degree, it's because there's more Burmese than English spoken. Like just today, I went to a house this morning, and there was one American man there. I think he was married to one of the Burmese ladies. And he's sitting there and listening to the Teaho, and the Teaho is all in Burmese, and he doesn't understand any of it. So he just sits there and not understanding anything. And then 2 days ago, it was the same thing, where you've got one American fellow he's just sitting there and not understanding anything that's being said. And so that's part of it. That it's mostly Burmese. They answer the phone in Burmese, not in English. And a lot of Americans, they just feel like they're not fitting in. They feel like outsiders. They're not really, it's just not according to their point of view or something like that. So even though they're welcome, usually, they're very welcome, and people, invite them in and have them, have them eat and everything, but still it's just they don't really understand it, and especially when they're not speaking English, and it just doesn't work very well. And so there has to be something that's I should say that every once in a while you'll have someone who's successful, like Uthilananda, who spoke English very well and could teach Myanmar, or could teach like Dhamma in English very well. And also we had kind of a Western kind of point of view, so he could understand how Westerners think and could teach them according to that. Every once in a while you'll have somebody like that. So with regard to spreading Dhamma to the ethnic Theravada does not seem to be the most even the shadows who come here, mostly they're just teaching to other Burmese people. Not a lot of real Thapanapu going on. And also, the places that are successful with Westerners wanting to go there are more like Yitas. Like the Tagata Meditation Center in San Jose. There's a Sikan colony. It's very quiet, and people just go there for meditation and maybe to learn something. But you don't have lots of shouting and laughing and birthday parties and the kids. It's noisy, and they can't meditate. Maybe even the monks aren't meditating, so then they just look somewhere else. And so the second kind, as a possible way of helping the West to have more Dhamma, would be the Western monastic Buddhism. So it's like Western monks and the Westerners who support the monks. And there's not very many. I think in the whole world there might be maybe 200 Western monks. So there's not very many of us. And one way that we are different from like the Asian monks, I mean there's overlap, of course, but there are certain differences. Like I've already said, that we tend to be radicals. And if you're going to go against your family and go against your friends and go against your culture in order to become a monk, you have to have like strong adaitan. You have to really be serious about what you're doing. And so, before I continue, I'm sorry if I'm going to make people unhappy by saying some of this stuff, because of some of this stuff that I'm, comparing different kinds of Buddhism. I'm criticizing everybody. I'm not trying to say that one way is good and another way is bad or anything like that, but still, to explain why Westerners don't follow the Burmese way, it's sort of, to some way, it's criticizing. But I'm not saying that the Western way is right or wrong, or the Burmese way is right or wrong. So, because the Western monks, they're having to go against everybody in order to become a monk, usually. They tend to be very serious, or more serious than most. So maybe even half of Western monks will follow weenie strictly. Maybe half, like with regard to money. About half of Western monks don't use money. Whereas with the Burmese, maybe 5% don't use money. Maybe less than 5%. So that's one difference. And another difference that, just for the sake of explaining things, you might not like this, but most Western monks don't believe Abhidhamma. Maybe 30% or 25% of Western monks will study Abhidhamma and believe it. And as I say, I'm not trying to criticize anybody or say anybody's right or wrong, but there are some reasons for this, and I will give the most important reason, which is historical. And so, at least you'll understand why Western monks, so many of them, don't really care about Abhidhamma very much. Like at Abhayagiri, almost nobody studies Abhidhamma. It's like the biggest Western monastery in California anyway. So according to history, during the time of Asoka Minji in India, there were about 18 different kinds of Buddhism. Mahayana kit miyatevu, Buddhabhasa amyomyo shire. So you have Theravada and Sabhativada and Samitiya and Vizipottiya and Mahathangika. There's many different kinds. And these different kinds of Buddhism, they weren't Mahayana yet, so they were very similar with regard to Vini, and also with regard to the Digha Nikaya, Majjhima Nikaya, Samyutta Nikaya, Ingottara Nikaya. So with regard to Vini and the first four Nikayas, they're about 85% the same. Pretty similar, mostly the same, not so different. But with regard to Abhidhamma, there's almost no similarity at all. For example, we have the Pali Abhidhamma, and also we have the Sabhativada Abhidhamma, even though there aren't any more Sabhativada Buddhists, but still they have the books. And Sabhativada and Theravada are similar. They're close. They split apart at about the time of the Third Council. And the Sabhativada Abhidhamma and the Theravada Abhidhamma are maybe 10% the same. So they're very different from each other, mostly different. And some of the old schools didn't even have an Abhidhamma. So the scholars, the Western Buddhism experts, they say because it's so different, probably it didn't exist until after the Sangha Vedas, after the different kinds of Buddhism split apart. That's why the Padimalt is almost exactly the same, and the Vini is 85% the same, and the Thotanda are 85% the same, but the Abhidhamma is maybe 5 or 10% the same. So it is, they assume that Abhidhamma didn't really arise until after the different schools split apart. But you can decide for yourself. I just wanted to give you the main reason why Westerners, they have more doubt about Abhidhamma than the Burmese do. I think of all the Theravada Buddhist countries, the Burmese like Abhidhamma the best. And I think the Thais like Vini the best, so I guess maybe the Thiho Ponjis like the Thotanda the best. I don't know about them. And you'd think that Western monks could be the best way of spreading Theravada to America. And that was like the plan for Taungpulu Sayadaw with Boulder Creek. He wanted to set up an American Sangha of Western monks there, and then Burmese monks would all go home, and then they'd have this Sangha of Western monks that would start Theravada. But it didn't work out that way for various reasons. And one reason that I talked about last week is that Westerners, we think like Protestant Christians. Even though we're not Protestant Christians, most of us, still the culture is a Protestant Christian culture. I mean, that's where it came from. English culture is Protestant Christian. And we think in English, and it's easier to even think about Protestant Christianity than it is to think about Buddhism, because you've got the vocabulary and everything is all designed for that. And in Protestant Christianity, it rebelled against monks and priests. And before the Protestants, you had the Catholics, and the Catholics had monks and nuns and priests, and they were the ones that would help you to get into heaven. But the Protestants say, no, we're going to do it ourselves. We don't need monks and nuns and priests. We're just going to, we can talk to God ourselves. And so one of the first things that happened with the Protestants is they just got rid of all the monasteries and the monks and the nuns. But so they don't really have an idea of of supporting monks. It's just not part of Western culture to support monks very much. Maybe among Catholics, but even the Catholic monks, they make cheese and sausages and beer and sell that instead of people, just giving them support. So even the strict Catholic monks, they're making beer and selling the beer to support the monastery rather than having the Christian people, giving them food. So the Western monks is just not working very well. Like there's the story of when Athoka Min, he sent his son Mahinda to Sri Lanka to start Buddhism there for Thadhanapyu. And after some years, the king of Sri Lanka asks him, how are we doing? Are you spreading Buddhism to Sri Lanka? And he says, well, the seed has been planted, but the roots haven't gone into the soil yet. Was the Myit. Yeah. And so the king asks him, well, what has to happen for that? And Shin Mahinda tells him, well, you have to have, Sri Lankan men born in Sri Lanka to Sri Lankan parents who become monks in Sri Lanka, and then they recite the Parimaut in a thing in Sri Lanka. So you've got the monks doing Upopyu in Sri Lanka, all Sri Lankan. And that has already happened in the West. You've got Western monks who are, they're born and ordained in the West, and they're doing Upopyu in the West. But most of the people who support those monks are Asian people. Like even Abhayagiri in Northern California, it's mostly the Thai people who support them. I don't know of any monks at all in the West who are supported mainly by Western people. It's almost all Asians who are supporting the Western monks. I mean, there are some, but I don't know of any that's supported mostly by Western people. So in a way, the Western monks are kind of a branch of the Asian Buddhism rather than real Western Buddhism. We're not a branch from the ethnic Theravada in America. We're more of a branch from the monks in Asia. Like most of the Western monks are ordained in Asia, or they stay in Asia for a long time and then they come back. They get tired of sweating all the time and getting strange diseases all the time, and then they come back to America. But still, it's the Asian people like you who are supporting the monks, and the Thai people also. So that way isn't working very well either. And so the third kind of Theravada that I was talking about is the elite Theravada, like what's happening at Spirit Rock. And there's a lot more people following it. But it doesn't seem to me like it's not really pure Dhamma. Because for one thing, like the article was saying, it's mostly older, white, rich people. And some of the retreats, the retreat centers, they can charge $1,000 a day just for a retreat. A Tyasakan, you have to pay $1,000 a day or more than $1,000, and it's like luxury. You can get massages and everything in between the meditation. You can go like sailboarding, and it's like a luxury resort where you meditate. A lot of them are like this. And places like Spirit Rock, they're considered to be, the best. It's like the more expensive it is, the better it is. That's the way people think in the West. If you can charge $1,000 a day, they must be really good, so everybody wants to go there. And the thing is, they mix lots of things together. They should just call it Vipassana or something, and not even really call it Theravada Buddhism, because it's got so many other things mixed in. And also, it's almost all just meditation. It's like Western Buddhists, they like meditation, but they don't like the thila that comes before the meditation. It's like they don't want to use the knife to carve the statue. They just want to use the sandpaper, this with the stuff that's supposed to finish it. You know, they want to start with that, but you can't really make a statue just using sandpaper. You have to do some hard work before you get that far. That's like the fine adjust. So they ignore most of it. You know, they like the meditation and they like some of the philosophy, but most of it, you know, the supporting the Sangha, they don't like. They call themselves Sangha. That was amazing to me. When I came back to America, you've got a meditation group of people. Most of them probably don't keep 5 precepts, but they're calling themselves Sangha. You know, so it's like, wow. They really don't respect monks very much at all. It's just a monk is just another person. That's another thing about America, is everyone's equal. You know, it's like in Burma, the word for me and the word for you depends upon all kinds of things. You know, it's like somebody who's really high is a Shimpaya, and then there's, you know, like Kimya, or if you don't like the person at all, you can call them Min or Nin, or, you know, there's all these different words for me and you, but in America it's just me, you, and everyone's equal. So because of that, also monks are just the same as everybody else. They don't get more respect than anybody else. So that's one thing with regard to the elite Buddhism in the West. And also, in addition to different kinds of Buddhism or different kinds of philosophy, and just ignoring the majority of it, they're mixing in other things also, like political correctness. For example, at Spirit Rock, I've been told that on the altar, on the piazza, they don't just have the Buddha, but they've got like a Mahayana goddess sitting next to him, so that you can have gender equality. You know, you have a male and a female, because having just a male is sexist, and that's not politically correct. And because of this, one of the most important issues in the American Vipassana, the community, is bhikkhunis. There has to be a bhikkhuni sangha. Has to be a bhikkhuni sangha. And the monks who know we they say, well, I mean, it's possible, but you have to have it according to the rules. But the rules are just irrelevant. There just has to be bhikkhunis. There has to be bhikkhunis. It doesn't matter if you say it has to be according to the rules and there's these problems, then you're just being sexist. So that's like the big debate going on with in places like Spirit Rock, or it's not even really a debate, because you have to agree that there has to be bhikkhunis, or else, you know, they won't even invite you there. Like there's a famous monk, Ajahn Thanisaro, who is like the Vinayadhara of Western monks. You know, he's the Vinaya expert. He writes the Vinaya books for Western monks. He writes them in English. So most Western monks read his books to help them understand Vinaya. And so there's another monk in Australia who ordained some bhikkhunis. He says, now these are bhikkhunis. They're fully ordained bhikkhunis. And so they sent a description of the ordination to Ajahn Thanisaro, the Vinayadhara, to ask him, you know, is this okay? I mean, did we do it right? And he sent them this long list of rules that they broke by doing it. So then they just say, okay, well, we're not inviting you anymore. So he got like uninvited from Spirit Rock, and he's like the bad guy now, because he's saying that, you know, the way they ordain the bhikkhunis isn't right. So that's like the big, you know, another big one now is Islam. So if you don't like Islam, that means that you're not being politically correct, and they don't like that either now. So even though a lot of people are following it, I just don't think it's the best way for Dhamma to come to America, because it's not, you know, it's sort of Dhamma. It's got some real Dhamma in it. At least it's got some meditation. But it's not really Theravada anymore. It's got some Theravada in it, but it's sort of like orange flavored Kool-Aid. It's not really orange juice. It's just like 10% juice or something. That's the way the elite, the the spirit rock kind of Theravada is working, in my opinion. Other people really like it, but I really can't take it very seriously. And so the fourth kind of Theravada in the West is the Goenka system. And they've got their own group. And monks like me, I mean, we can read books by U Goenka, and it's very simple. He kind of leaves out a lot of things, and maybe he's not exactly accurate with some things. But at least he's got Sila Samadhi Pinya, and they don't charge any money. It's not $1,000 a day. It's just, you can donate if you want, but you're not donating for yourself. You're donating for the next person after you. So, and it's very successful. They've got meditation centers all over the world now, and they don't charge any money for it. So it's doing pretty well. And it's more strict. It's not like a luxury meditation. It's got like this 3 hours per day where you're not allowed to move, even though your knee is in agony. Even though you're in pain, they say you shouldn't move. And if you want to do more than 10 days, then you have to keep Pinsatila, I think it's for like 2 years, or at least 1 year, and you have to meditate at least 2 hours a day for at least 1 or 2 years before they will let you do more than 10 days in a retreat. So it's got some sikan to it. It's strict. And so even though it's not like maximum Theravada Buddhism, it's sort of limited. It's like Muladantaya. But it works, and it's Theravada. So I think of all the kinds of Buddhism in America now, probably the Goenka system is the one that is most successful at spreading Taya to Americans. And another good thing about it is that a lot of monks and a lot of people that want to go farther, they start with Goenka. Like a lot of my friends of Western monks, they started with Goenka, and then when they got about as far as they could get doing the Goenka method, then they decided they wanted to become monks and go farther and go to Asia and live in the forest and meditate and that kind of thing. So of all the different kinds of Theravada in the West, the ethnic Theravada works best for the Asian people. I mean, it's just, you've had it in your culture for 1,000 years, since Anoya Tamin, so it works really well for you. You fit together very well, and obviously it makes people happy, and it makes better people. But for Westerners who think differently and have different culture and everything, so far the best that I have seen is the Goenka method with regard to how successful it is. But it would be nice if there start being more monks and people start supporting the monks more. Then I think that would be best of all. And there was one last thing. I wrote it down so I wouldn't forget it. But another thing I was going to say about the Vipassana, the elite form of Theravada, is that a lot of the teachers, they don't even really believe in Nibbana or Kamma or anything. It's just they use meditation as like a relaxation technique, a way of reducing stress. It's like a psychology technique. So, I mean, it works for that. And Vipassana is used in hospitals now to help people who have pain, or maybe they're very ill and they're afraid of dying or something. And so there are teachers at hospitals now who teach like Satipatthana and Vipassana to people to help them to accept the pain or to accept the fact that they may die soon. So that's very helpful. And in that way, it's certain aspects of Theravada Buddhism are being accepted into Western culture. Mainly meditation, but it's they're separating it from the whole idea of enlightenment, of Nibbana, anything like that, and it's used just as a way of having less dukkha, of reducing dukkha, and being being a little bit happier. So that was pretty much all I was going to say. And if you have any questions, you're welcome to ask. But I do hope that Dhamma will continue to grow in the West, because, like I said at the beginning, America really needs it. People just really need to realize that happiness comes from inside and not from outside. I mean, it's easier to be happy, if you have enough food to eat and you're not shivering with the cold or whatever. But still, it is possible to be happy with zero money and zero friends and an empty stomach, and you're thousands of miles away from your family and your friends and all this. I mean, it is possible still to be very happy, because I've been very happy like that before. So it comes from inside. It depends on whether you have craving or not, whether you have dukkha or not. So that's an important thing to bear in mind, is that if you're unhappy, it's not really somebody else's fault. I mean, they may be helping you to be unhappy, but really you're doing most of the work. So that was the end of the talk. If you have any questions, you're welcome to ask. And if you don't have any questions, that means you know everything. And I hope I didn't make anyone depressed by criticizing your religion. Doka kathin kinyin chabazi, biyan kathin kinyin chabazi, kusit napya shwinlan chamni chabazi, kankon chabazi.